So I want you to know the full bios for all of our panelists are on the table, and I don't have these in order, so I'm just going to tell you just quickly again, our panelists, Kathryn Bussman, who's the owner and manager of Crinoid Property Management, and I hope I pronounced that right. Orcilia Forbes, I think most familiar with, for me anyway, is that she's a trustee at Meyer Memorial Trust. Priscilla Kostiner she's the Women's Philanthropy Director for the Jewish Federation of Greater Portland. Martha Sloca Richards, Executive Director of the James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation. Rupa Jack, Senior Vice President, Institutional Consultant, and Family Wealth Director at Morgan Stanley. And does that fit on one business card? Okay, I just was curious. All right. So please welcome our panel, and especially Aggie Sweeney, who's our moderator.
Great. Thanks very much, Betsy, and thanks, AFP. Well, Collins Group, now a division of Campbell & Company, is really pleased to be sponsoring the Women in Philanthropy Luncheon again this year. And I want to introduce my colleague, Amy Brown, who's in the room, and delighted you're here, Amy. And our fellow colleague, Tom Wilson, I don't believe is able to make it today, but many of you know him. He's been serving as a fundraising consultant with Campbell & Company here, living in Portland for a long time, and actually working both here across the states and in Canada. So I wanted to take just a moment to frame our topic today, and then we have a number of questions that we will be inviting the panelists to respond to, and they can kind of take the dialogue where it goes. We didn't meet all together to prep for this in advance, but we did have a chance to meet over salad. Now, in a moment, all of you will soon be enjoying your entrees. And keep in mind, your panelists are going to be hungry until we're done. So let's talk about why are we talking about women, philanthropy, and leadership. Throughout my life, being a bit of a feminist and being interested in women's leadership and advancement of women and in philanthropy, all of those have been themes that have been very near and dear to where I've chosen to invest my time and much of my attention. And I was recently re-reviewing information that came out in research from the Women in Philanthropy Institute at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University. And all of you are probably familiar with the headlines from that data that first came out in 2010, and then reports have come out annually since then that have pointed out a few things. And none of these are surprises. We're not trying to do any male bashing, but we just want to have the reality. What the research has shown is even though women, unfortunately, still earn less than men on average and have less wealth at the time of retirement, women give more generously when they're the influencer of philanthropic decisions. And that's true during their careers as well as in retirement. As the amount more that women give isn't just a little bit, it's like 89% more than their male counterparts when we control for income and age. And for women of high net worth, it's almost 130% more. Another thing that we know from following research, but we also all kind of know it anyway from the work that we do, is as men and women are actively involved in our nonprofits and our institutions, they give more philanthropically. Board members who really understand the issues are the ones that generally will give the most significant gifts, and those that we have long-term relationships with and that we also engage them in helping to set our directions tend to give more. And we recognize that that's true for women, and that women's philanthropy tends to be directed to areas that help to strengthen families and communities more than men's philanthropy tends to be. So when we look at how can we as a society do everything we can to put women in leadership positions, there's many benefits. There will be most likely more given to philanthropy and more leadership around building strong families and strong communities. Does that make sense? So today, in putting this panel together, and it was wonderful to work with Candace and other AFP members. I didn't select who would be on the panel. I was delighted with who was selected and invited and who said yes. But we really wanted to kind of put a little bit of a twist on today's panel to look at the importance of women in leadership roles, what we can learn from them, how we can support them, and how they can help all of us, men and women, in advancing our impact on making a better world. So with that, that's my context, that I won't go any further, but I do have a housekeeping note. In the center of your tables, there are some index cards where if you're interested in having me ask a particular question of the panel in general or of a particular panelist, I'd appreciate that you would jot it down and you or someone else at your table can run it up when you want to do that. Throughout the panel today, I have some preset questions that I have shared with the panelists in advance. It doesn't mean that all 5 of our wonderful women leaders will answer every question, but those that want to will have a chance to. But what I ask, and in addition what you ask, may change based upon how the discussion goes this afternoon. Also, at your tables, there's some Collins Group Post-it notes and some candy from Campbell Company, and you're welcome to take that with you at the end today. So let me start with the first question, and this is one that's sort of the one that I put out in the email that many of you probably first read late last night or early this morning. And it came out of a discussion that Orcilia and I had as we talked last week. And not only are our panelists women who sometimes have a harder time getting ahead than our male counterparts, but also many of our panelists have faced other barriers that could have been limitations on their careers or on the impact that they've been able to have. And those limitations are often self-imposed. It can be confidence, or it may be what someone else said. You really shouldn't expect that you can be able to do that. So I want to ask any of our panelists if they'd like to answer the question of, as you think about barriers that you have had, how have you overcome them or not? And anything that you would like to share with our audience today from your perspective. Would anyone like to start?
You're all so polite.
It doesn't sound like it's on.
All right, I'll start.
Is it on now?
Now it is. Thank you.
The question Aggie put to us was, are you held back by lack of confidence? Are you reluctant to take risks? And I read that to my husband, and he laughed out loud. So I am not a person who has those challenges generally, but I did give it some thought, and I grew up in a house where I was taught that I should do anything if I just worked hard enough. But I'd say to other women, show up. Take the first step. It's not a popularity contest, so not everyone will like you, and that's okay, because you have a goal or a mission or a cause, and you need to follow your heart. So at some level, you gather the people that support you, and you trust that they're going to be there when you take those steps. But after you take those steps, you just do the best you can. So that would be my answer.
Okay. Orcilia?
Ruby, did you want to?
Yeah, I do.
Thanks,
I
Kathryn.
think when you put women versus men in a context.
Ruby, why don't you? Yeah, I think that it's hard to hear. Thank you.
Is that okay? Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay.
I think when you put the context of women versus men as far as jobs and advancement of jobs, I think you have to look at it from a cultural perspective. And I don't care what culture somebody is. I think women definitely have it a little more difficult than men. I think you have to be much more competent, and I think you have to have a lot more confidence. And with confidence, it's going to lead to action. And unless you're willing to commit to taking the action and not sitting back, you are going to be put in a different place than a man. Let me give you an example of a boardroom. If you go into an institutional boardroom and you're the only person that is female in that boardroom, you're going to be looked at differently. In fact, you have to be very careful, and Orcilia can tell you better than me, there's a lot of politics that goes into these boardrooms. If you say too much in the beginning, you're considered to be either arrogant or, too showy. They have better words than that start with a B for that. But on the other hand, if you sit quietly and you say nothing, you are not going to get advanced. If a boss, if a manager had to look at you, compare you to somebody who's less competent than you but is actually willing to commit to words, what they want, and if you're sitting there really competent and not going to say as much, you're not going to get the advancement. And that's the bottom line. And so part of it is being able to have the confidence to ask, and in order to ask, you have to be competent. And then that's going to lead to action where you will either succeed or fail. But at least you get the chance to determine which one you want to do. And in my opinion, failure is not an option.
Great. Thanks, Rupa.
I'm going to take that a little further. Okay. In many ways, my role model was my father, who, as a veteran in World War I, or as an infantryman, World War II, not World War I, World War II, was injured and lost his left leg. All right, so I grew up knowing my father as an amputee. It never stopped him from doing anything. It never stopped him from moving forward. And watching him and being the only child and somebody who really adored my dad gave me the confidence to try whatever was out there. So there was never a barrier, there was never anything that said, you can't do that, other than somebody making the comment, oh, don't go into medicine, there aren't women in medicine, right? This goes back a long time. It's certainly different now, but that was the only thing that I was ever discouraged from doing. But I want to go back into that boardroom that you talked about, Rupa, and a number of years ago when I was just getting started in the community here, a fairly newcomer to the community, and walking into a boardroom that was filled with men who were the main forces in the annual campaign of fundraising and whatnot, and I was there to train them. Okay? I was there as their trainer on how do you solicit? How do you get the gift to move from here to here to here? And I really had to acknowledge the fact to them, saying, you've all had the experience that I may not have had, but I have something to share with you that's going to help you do your job better. And therefore, we're going to have an experience together today. We're going to learn together. And that was a door that opened lots of opportunities after that. So it was acknowledging the fact that they were sitting around the table and I was standing at the head of the table. And I had to work really hard to get them to accept the fact that I was going to teach them something. After that, we got along just fine.
I had an experience when I was at Portland State University where there was a change in leadership. And it became clear to me that I was going to be put in a box and I could do certain things, but that was going to be it. It was going to be very restrictive. And so I could have stayed there. It was very comfortable. But instead, I did leave Portland State. I went to the University of New Mexico, where so many doors opened for me. And I'm saying that because I think often for women, for various reasons, we don't leave and go out of state for a position to get advancement. We seem to stay where we hope will advance right there in that organization, or certainly right there in that community. And that can hold us back, frankly. That can hold us back. So it's, what kind of a sacrifice are you willing to make? For me, it was leaving my family, commuting to Albuquerque every 2 weeks or so, and for 9 years. But the benefits in terms of what I could give to that community and what they gave to me were just outstanding. So think about that perspective as well.
Well, I was always going to be an actress, and so I was very good at playing other roles than myself, and that's one of the things you realize when you become an actor, you're always compensating for some other limitation in your life. And when I actually started doing fundraising, I was much younger than I am today, much younger, and I often found myself in the room and with people who didn't do fundraising and didn't have my experience. But gosh, if they didn't know absolutely every strategy to raise money having never asked for it, which put me in an awkward position a lot of times. And I found that I could say something, and then a man would say exactly the same thing, and they'd go, wow, George, that is a really great idea. Now, as an actress, you're always looking at the dynamic in the room, and so what I did is I did three things. First of all, I found the men in the room who would agree with me, and periodically they would say, you know, Martha has a really good idea. Perhaps we should listen to her. And they were very good. We actually worked it out in advance. I got to tell you, theater is really theater because you work it all out in advance. The other piece is I found by using humor, I could make a point and it would cut through it. Thirdly, I used their very point of concern or challenge as a yes statement. I hear what you're saying. I totally understand that that is an obstacle, and here's 1, 2, or 3 strategies we could use to get around it, as opposed to saying, that is the stupidest idea, which is what I was writing on my piece of paper, so I just have to be clear. Have to get the things out so that the words that come out of your mouth are not what you're writing down. And the final thing I used was I changed my speaking style. And this was something I learned by observation. Another theater trick is men answered questions in 3 sentences or 4, in short declarative sentences. Women tend to answer things in long, rambling sentences with lots of, and then I did this, and then I did, this is how I think we come to the solution. By changing the style of how I presented myself, I had more, people heard me more. And it ceased to be a female and male thing, and maybe, and I don't know what it was, but I do notice when I made the change in the style of the way I presented my ideas, they were heard.
Thank you. Thank you all. The next question, and some of you started on to respond to this a bit already, is think back to women that have served as role models for you. You may or may not want to name someone, but conjure up in your memory. And what are some of the traits of leadership that you have found to be helpful for you?
I think I'll start with that one. Oops. Well, first of all, I have to say, before I start with the women, I think my number one role model was my dad, because his idea about life was quite interesting, because he believes if you're going to step your foot on this earth and stay here for a little bit of time, you better give something back to the world. So that's one thing I learned from him. The second role model was Jerry Rice, who is the receiver for the 49ers back in my days. And I'll tell you, the reason he was my role model is during workout practices, the guy, all the other receivers Joe Montana would throw the ball to would run out and get the ball and walk the ball back. Jerry Rice was the only one who'd go 100% out, 100% back, and then he'd run around the track once. It shows hard work, commitment, dedication, and so on. And, well, as far as the female role model, I'm sitting next to my role model because Orcilia, I used to actually stalk her a couple years ago. I mean, I used to send her emails. I used to send her like, hey, let's get together for lunch. And she's like, oh my gosh, who is this person? But the reason I stalked her is she was on the Meyer Memorial Trust, and I was on Social Venture Partners. I was one of the board members, and I just wanted to learn about philanthropy because I knew I was writing big checks, but on the other hand, I wasn't sure why I was writing these checks and what does it all mean and what's philanthropy about. So what I learned from her is her love for higher education, the administration. I learned how she took risks, going to New Mexico. I mean, she doesn't know how much I know about her, which is kind of scary. But the thing about her is she's tough. She's confident, she's competent, and she really has dealt in a man's world, but yet she's had so much respect. And so to me, that's where I would go with my role model is for her. So anyway, you can thank me later.
I owe you. I started to think about the way we come up with a role model, and oftentimes it is an exposure after we're in a profession and we are aware of organizations or boards, et cetera. And I wanted to be more realistic about where I found my role model, and that was a school nurse in high school. Because I didn't have any of those exposures, I thought to myself, sometimes these role models are minimized because they are not out in the world. But she was very professional, very knowledgeable. She had a demeanor about her that students trusted her. She was warm. She listened. And she also then approached me because when I went to high school, if you look forward to college or post-secondary education, it was going to be nursing or school teacher or social worker. That was it for a woman. So I chose nursing. And she found out about it, so she invited me in to work in the office with her, which gave me even more of an exposure of how she dealt so well with who she was and helping all of these students, et cetera. And then my senior year, I was on track to go to a 3-year hospital nursing program, the only one in New Mexico, except that she found out that the University of New Mexico had just opened a 4-year nursing program. And so she went through everything with me so that I would go to the university. She knew enough about the differences, and she had enough confidence in me to really push me in that direction, which, as we know, if you can go to higher education versus just getting a trade approach, can open all kinds of doors. So thank you for the question, because it did allow me to think back that our role models can be very, quote, simple people doing great things. She did. Great, thank you.
I did mention my father, who was definitely a role model. And there are 3 people who pop in mind as I'm listening to what others are saying. One is a teacher from high school, and I can still picture the way she walked, one of those lanky walks, kind of like the body was forward and the feet were still behind her, and then all of a sudden the feet would move forward. She was the head of the drama department and the speech department, and she was our class advisor. And she was the one who headed me in the direction of the college I ended up attending. So for that, I have a lot of thanks. But in the world of philanthropy and fundraising, there are 2 women who come to mind, both of whom have been national leaders and professionals. And the first one, and ladies, I think you'll perhaps identify with this. I took one look at this lady and I said, that's what I want to look like when I grow up. She was petite, okay? She had great legs. Excuse me for saying that. I know it sounds sexist, but she had great legs, and she had a way of wearing her pearls and her hair and everything. She looked great in front of an audience anytime, and she knew exactly what she was saying. She had more information in her head about money and where it comes from and where it's going and what we're going to do with it. She had a great story, her own personal story of how she came from here to there and how she got to where she was going to be, I thought, oh, that's what I want to look like when I grow up. Unfortunately, I was already grown and past her size already. But beside that, the other woman who comes to mind, a woman by the name of Carol Solomon, who's from Philadelphia. And Carol was on the national scene in the organizations I've been active with. My background is primarily in the Jewish community, United Jewish Appeal, and the Jewish Federations of North America. We've all kind of merged from one to another. Carol was the national chairman of the Women's Board, and then went on to be the first woman of the national campaign of this organization, an organization that raises over $1 billion a year. At that, this past year, it was $880 million plus special funds, so it's over $1 billion. And she was the one who broke the glass ceiling. She was the one who managed to be in the boardroom with the man, who managed to take on that position as the national chairman. And I've never seen a woman think on her feet more than Carol did. And she inspired us. She pushed us. She really set the pace for all of us who were fundraisers, either as lay leaders or as professionals, and going back from one side to the other, as many of us did. And I think that she really led the way to say, a woman can do this, and can do it well, and can do it, I wouldn't say better than, but certainly can equal any man who's out there. So she's really been in my mind for a long, long time, and she's gone on to do some excellent, exciting things.
Thanks. Great. Your turn.
Yeah, do you want to, Kathryn? Or?
I had written down my mother because she entered the workforce when all of her kids were grown and proceeded to be elected twice as mayor of our community. And after that, she decided she'd just keep going. And she managed several very significant fundraising and foundation activities, both in the Chicago area where I grew up, and then when she moved to Colorado. And what I watched her do from a pretty young age was build consensus and be the person in the boardroom. Generally, she became president of whatever not-for-profit she was in charge of or a part of, and she would guide them to new levels of giving by setting an example among board members who often didn't recognize that philanthropy was not just time but treasure, and that it involved giving of yourself to set an example. So she managed a number of not-for-profits to very successful outcomes before she retired and moved on to the next one. So I would have to say my mother was a role model from before I even recognized that what she was doing and how it impacted my life, and it was a good thing. I also would like to add to the theater comments from earlier, because it's true, the way in which you present yourself is very important. My father said, don't wear brown suits when I got my first job in 1978 and was working for AT&T and thought I knew how to look professional. He took me aside and said, you can't wear ties, but white shirts and navy blue suits are the uniform of the day. So if you want to fit in as a manager, you got to go out and get that. But I also learned that you cannot apologize before you say what you want. So women, I think, unfortunately, start with an apology. This might not be, I'm so sorry this is, it hurts me when I see that happen, because I want them to say in 2 or 3 sentences what their idea is, or how they think we're going to solve a problem or raise money better, and then I want them to stop before they say, well, you know, someone else might have a better idea. I want women to just say, my idea is valid, valuable, and put it out there, and be real careful not to apologize, because that's a very female thing to do. So.
I'm just going to add a few things. I really liked that. That was great. There is a costume. We actually refer to it as putting our costume on and our makeup on before going out and seeing all of you. I wanted to take a couple things from what you've said, and also as part of my experience. My role model was the woman who ran the theater company that I interned in, and then by 8 years later, when she decided to move on, I took her position after having done every job in the theater that you can imagine on this side of the footlights. There are a couple things about her. She wasn't perfect. That's just for the record. But she hired and she listened to people smarter than herself. And she operated, if she couldn't figure out the problem, which you can't, you do know that, it cannot be solved on your desk, she actually would scan the zone around her, around the people whose minds were involved in this topic and in this solution finding phase, and she would seek out people with better ideas and she would talk to them. So she didn't shrink her mind to the size of her desk. She actually had a much broader group of people who she felt she could ask questions of. She did not believe she knew every answer, which is good. She continued to learn, and she forever put our work, a small theater company in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, in the context of what was going on nationally around theater and all of the arts. So every time we would think we had a little problem, subscription tickets weren't being sold, blah, 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 we need to do X or Y, she would go, this is the same thing that's being experienced across the country, and here are some of the other solutions. And so the piece of it is, we're in a time right now where people are confused. We've been through a lot of different times. Theater and the arts are affected by the psyche of the society at the time. And it was part of her ability to put our work, our little institution, in the context of a broader environment that required me to think that way too. She read voraciously. She was always something she would bring in. And finally, we would sit down and have the meeting and we'd say, here are some solutions. And she'd go, these are our solutions. Couldn't we do anything better than this? And even sometimes that was some of her solutions. She would just kind of look at them and go, let's take another whack at this, and let's see if we can come up with some better solutions, because these are not the solutions. And so she challenged us all the time to think bigger than what we were thinking, because our minds tended to shrink to the size of our desks.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all. So the next question, you're all in leadership positions, currently in different roles, and you have been over a number of years. What's your advice for how you can use your leadership position to help advance philanthropy and the greater good? And this can be through nonprofits, through civic engagement. Any suggestions for what others can do, or any stories that from your own history that you'd like to share?
I guess I'll go first, since it's
Okay, go ahead, Rupa.
Well, in my industry, I'm in a really fortunate position, because one of the things that I do with our clientele is to really figure out what the complexities of people's lives are. And when you do that and you go through the discovery process of knowing that person, you learn about their goals and dreams and things that are important to them. So always the subject really surrounds about what kind of legacy that they want to leave on Earth, and what kind of legacy they want to leave on Earth for their children. And so it does involve the nonprofit, and it's in an amazing way, because it's not about the investment. It's about being able to manage lives and being able to look at them and say, you're going to have this issue. There's several ways to solve this issue. It really correlates to your life dreams. And if you really want to make impact in the community, here are some ways to do it. So from that standpoint, I feel like I'm very, very lucky. Not everybody in our industry does that, but if you have a family wealth directorship program going on, that is the first thing that we're really taught. So I hope that answered the question for you.
Good, thanks. Anyone else want to comment? Okay.
I found that you can do a lot sort of internal to your organization and then also external to your organization. So while I was at different universities, for example, I was very blessed that those in leadership positions recognized that having certain faces out in the community was a benefit back to that university. So I was able to do a lot I was on the Performing Arts Center Committee because Joe Blumel felt it was important that Portland State have a role there. And there were other examples like that. So within your organizations, there are probably ways you can be taking advantage of membership, board memberships, et cetera, outside that have those linkages. Because philanthropy can also be just friend building for a while, as you all know. External, then, you do get to that point where your network gets out, and so you may get a call because somebody needs some assistance on the board, or maybe just volunteering to raise money, which I've done for different organizations in this community, sort of quietly at times. And then currently, we at Meyer have always had as a mission advancing philanthropy. And so we house GOSW as an in-kind, and if there are any other opportunities, we've assisted with when it was taxed and all of the organizations that assist nonprofits because we feel we do have a special role to play in advancing philanthropy throughout our state.
Thank you.
So I would say that you need to make it personal, that you need to connect with the causes that you believe in, and then that flows out to the people you know and talk to and work with who ask about that or want to know more or see your name printed. For me, I have been involved in a number of charitable organizations as a donor, not just as a board member, and I don't like recognition. It isn't important to me to have my name in lights. I like to be thanked, but I also realize from having had my name out there that it makes a difference to other people who know me and who see my name and then connect with me, and they're through that connect with that cause. And I didn't realize that until people would come up to me and say, we saw your name and tell us about why you're doing that. So I would say make it personal and be ready to talk to people in your network or among your friends about why you're doing what you're doing. And then Candace is sitting here, so I'm reminded of an event that we hosted at our home that was a fundraiser for the Alternative Dispute Resolution Program at the U of O, where a friend of ours happened to be the director. And I had such an interest in that because of the Rotary Peace Program around the world that I decided we'd just invite a bunch of people, and she'd bring some of those amazing students in that master's program, and we'd just have a party. And it was an opportunity to introduce people we didn't ask for money at all. We just said, we'd like you to know more about this. It's important to us. It crosses boundaries with a lot of the organizations, education, Rotary, the law school at the university. And for us, it made sense to just bring a lot of people in to hear about it. So there are a lot of ways to take your personal causes, but also the organizations you're involved with, and connect with people on a very one-on-one level. And I think that's important. Earlier at our table, someone said, Facebook like is not a fundraising strategy. And I don't like Facebook anyhow, but I know it's here to stay, so that's a different topic. But it's true, that's not personal enough. And people who are women and men who are connecting to a cause, they got to feel it. It's not enough to write a check. It's about, is it meaningful to you, and how do you connect with that on a very personal level for that audience? So ask your board members to help.
I'll go next, so I'm not always at the end. Would that be
Well,
okay?
whatever.
All right, I'll go next, then you could be then. I looked at this question from the civic civic good part, because I've done a lot of fundraising. And there were two experiences I wanted to share. And one was about 20 years ago, the performing arts facilities here charged commercial rates to everyone, including all the nonprofits that used it. So in addition to receiving your money from the city, the state, the NEA, and lots of private philanthropies, you wrote that check to the city of Portland. And where there was a number of arts organizations who used those facilities who thought that wasn't right. What I learned from that experience of being part of a cabal of 5 organizations. Oh, and this is at the time where they're cutting deals with people who wanted to rent the Civic Stadium and a bunch of their other facilities, but not the arts, because, you know, those are people with money. So what we learned is, I agree with you, you have to know what you care about. You have to know what you care about, and you need to locate the others who share what you care about. Very easy to do that in this circumstance. We did a lot of research, and we asked a lot of questions, and we were able to produce a paper that said the rates that we pay for rent at the Performing Arts Facility are considerably higher, like by 50 to 100%, than our peers in other markets this size or any other large city. Hence, we are no longer going to pay these rents. So we went on a rent strike. It was very quiet. People didn't really know that we weren't paying our rent. So we were very clear about the shared goal. Very clear. And we figured they could just lock the damn facilities and then they wouldn't have any of us in it. But I mean, the key to this was there was a lot of opportunity for us to split apart, to decide on other strategies. So the couple other things I learned from this is be very clear on the shared goal. Know that that's the mark on the horizon. Be flexible about the strategies that get you to that goal. You know, the first point A to point B may not actually be the direction that you're headed. That may fail. Kind of like one of those labyrinth games, you know, you play it, the ball falls in the hole, you have to start over again. Leave your ego at the door. There was no place for ego in this particular battle. We did make mistakes. We did make enemies. Don't take it personally. And finally, listen, assimilate, and take steps. You do know that there are nonprofit rates at a variety of different levels at the Performing Arts Facility.
Okay, so I'll follow up with that. If you're looking to raise money or you're looking to involve people, you have to find out what it is that they care about. And you don't do that by saying, here, go sell tickets for a turkey raffle for a softball team if nobody in the family eats turkey or is involved with softball. You have to find out what it is that people care about, number one. So you ask, why is it that you are involved? What got you started? Just the same kind of questions that we're being asked here. What is it? Who is your mentor? What made you come to this particular event or get involved with the community? So that's number one. Number two is, if in today's society, people don't want to just give to the black hole that collects a lot of money. They want a hands-on experience. They want to do something as well as give. And I would not want to equate time with money, because it's lovely for us to give time, but without the money to make those things happen, it's not going to work. So you really have to find out where people are and what it is that they want to do and understand the donors in today's world. And one of the best ways to do that is to take them to see it, okay? An on-site visit, a hands-on experience, a trip with a purpose. We call them missions. I would call them a trip with a purpose that actually takes people to the place where something is happening and they're able to see and feel and participate in that activity that they care about, whether it's education, whether it's the arts, whether it's helping the elderly, whatever it is, or stocking the shelves at the homeless shelter or at the food bank. This is where they are. This is how you're going to get them involved. And if you don't ask, you won't know. And if you don't ask, you don't get. So you have to be ready to do both. You have to listen very, very carefully to what it is that person is saying. I really care about the elderly and the seniors. Don't put these people in a sandbox with a bunch of kids if what they really want to do is help the seniors. So you have to be flexible enough and ready to offer some examples of what's out there and how they can get involved.
Great, thank you, thank you. I want to just move on, and then we can do that. earlier I mentioned that we wanted to give all of you an opportunity to ask some of the questions. So if you've written down any questions and you'd like to have me review those and ask them of our panelists, would somebody offer to just kind of gather up the cards and bring them up, and we'll move to that. And then, Rupa, why don't you go ahead?
To follow up with Priscilla's comments, yeah, I'm on a lot of people will call me to either be on their board or donate money, and 9 times out of 10, they'll always ask, well, is Mr. Jack in? You know, and so the thing is, if you really want to get good donors, Google your donors. There's so much information, and make sure you know them, because, I mean, we got off on the wrong foot right away, and this happens probably 4 out of 5 times where they don't know who I am. And I'm not on the fundraising side, I'm on the other side. So it's just words of caution and advice.
Did you have something? Okay. So there's, I think, a great question. We recognize that, and this may be a stereotype, but we know that many people are not comfortable talking about money, and there's a perception that women are probably less comfortable talking about money and big dollars and being comfortable with it than our male counterparts. So the question is, what's your approach when you're talking with a woman who thinks money is a dirty word, and if there's other ways that you can frame it. And we also know, and I'm going to kind of add to the written question, often people will say, you've got my time, you've got the best part of me, why would you want my money? So any comments on approach there?
I've been involved on both sides of this for a long time as a donor, but also as a solicitor and a solicitor trainer. So what we do typically is to try to get the appointment. A face-to-face conversation is a whole lot better than what happens over the phone, because over the phone you can't see that the woman is holding the phone and is doing the baby and is getting the bottle or is doing the dinner and so on. You really need to have that personal connection that across the table, or even if it's soliciting a man, or somebody, if you're a woman soliciting a man or a woman soliciting a woman, you need the personal attention, you need the face-to-face example. And I think, very honestly, you need to acknowledge the fact that some people are not comfortable talking about money. If we talk about money, sex, politics, and religion, we're getting right into somebody's space. And those are the things that make people a little bit nervous. Acknowledge that. It's okay. And I think the conversation in many ways is, you know, what we call the warm-up. How's the family? How's this? How's that? Know a little bit about them if you don't know them already. Google them or have some kind of information. Who knows that person that you're about to meet for the first time? And even bring along a second person, what we call a 2-on-1 solicitation. So there's always a set of ears that's listening at the same time that you're talking. And for the most part, you don't want to be the one talking. You want to encourage the person you're speaking to, that woman, to talk about her experiences and why she is connected to where she came from, who's her family, what has been her experience, has she ever been to someplace. Use open-ended questions. Give a person a chance to talk about their feeling for your cause, okay? And then put a suggested amount on the table, and it can be related to what other people are giving in her particular age group. Okay, it's helpful to put a suggestion out, something that relates to the number of days in the year, something in 1, 2, and 3, $1 a day, $2 a day, $3 a day. Don't be afraid to put a figure out there, but make sure that you don't start too low, because you can insult a person even more by asking for too little than you can ask for too much. Okay, you can always bargain down, you really cannot bargain up. And I remember being called by a student from the George Washington University, where I did my undergraduate, and they're calling, "Hi, how are you? This is the annual campaign. We're so happy you gave. Would you like to give what you gave last year?" And I said, "Wait a minute, is that really what you want?" And there was silence. "Well, no." I said, "You really want me to give what I gave last year?" "Well, no, I thought maybe if, you would say yes, then I could ask for more." I said, no. You don't ask for less and then ask for more. You start where you really want to be, and then we can negotiate. So why don't we do this all over again? And I had that student, I mean, he's in Washington, and we're thinking, what is this lady in Portland, Oregon telling me? But the whole idea is, don't be afraid to put a figure out on the table for women or for men. And remember that women control a great deal of the wealth in the country, and given the fact that there are billions of dollars waiting to change hands as we move from one generation to the next, and face it, ladies, we're going to live a little bit longer than our counterparts, we're in control, or we will be in control, of a lot of money. And people should feel good about being able to give and make a difference. I think that's the bottom line.
Great, good. So my next question for all of you, if you want to respond to it, as you consider the opportunity to give gifts from yourself rather than from organizations that you represent, or perhaps be involved in a board or another volunteer role, what do you look for in the nonprofits that you're willing to get really involved in?
Great leadership, a cause that I believe in, a clear sense of how my contribution will make a difference. So back to what Priscilla said, show them exactly what that's going to do, whatever that dollar amount is. So empower them to be a part of something that's successful. So for me, that would be the short answer.
Everything that Kathryn said was right. There's one thing, though, and it's probably because, maybe I don't have as deep pockets as a lot of people. So I have a certain budget that I actually use for donations, and I'm on 3 different boards. They all have big asks, and it gets to be tough. So I think maybe be cognizant. I'll do the ask because I really like the organization, what it stands for, but don't ask me to give more time, because I work. I have a big job, and I don't have the time to lead a committee or be on a committee or whatever it might be. I'll try as much as I can, but just be cognizant of what I do and that I'm still working. And I didn't inherit the wealth. I created my own. And I mean, it's just, there's a lot of stuff that goes on there. So it's, to me, I just want you guys to know, be cognizant that people have limitations, and a lot of it could be time, but we'd be more than happy to help in other areas that would require less time.
I like what you said, first of all, leadership, and then what I throw in is accountability, having clear goals, performing those, and I want to see the data, what you're doing. I think any more, and especially, I'm saying this personally, I've always looked for that, but I also brought that to Meyer in terms of impact. We are now looking at impact in much different ways than we probably did 10, 15 years ago.
Okay, great. So I have another question that came from someone in the audience, and it is, were you in a girls' organization that gave you inspiration, or perhaps another youth development organization that helped to shape you as a leader and with your outlook and your values? Anybody want to respond to that? Sure. Priscilla?
Oh, good God. Okay, double trouble.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, United Synagogue Youth, okay, it was a teenage organization. I joined as a freshman in high school. I've always been a political animal, so there were lots of offices to go to. And 55 years ago, this winter vacation, I was running from the floor for a national office. In fact, Aaron Perlman, your parents were at the same conference. We know each other going back a long time. And I was introduced to my husband. At that time, he wasn't my husband, but he had votes I wanted. Okay? And I said, will you vote for me? And he said, in his words, hell no, I'm backing the girl from Connecticut. And he swears that I swore eternal revenge. So yes, it definitely, number one, being part of a national organization, not just local, but a national organization, gave me access to other teenagers around the country. I actually ended up being on the national board and then becoming a national officer the next year. And we all are still in touch with each other across the country and around the world. And it's one of those conspiracies, as my husband likes to call it. But it taught us value at a very, very early age. It certainly has helped shape where I went, what I did, and loving having been an officer in high school and then in college also led me to take roles in the community here. So as I've mentioned, I've been on both sides, both as a professional and as a lay leader, and have sought out offices where I thought as a leader I could make a difference. And my husband and I are celebrating our 50th anniversary come November. So.
Is that your revenge?
That's my
I want to just add a quick note. For me, it was not necessarily a young girls group, but I went to Catholic school from first grade, and it was all Mexicans, all Mexican Americans. So it was a wonderful little group, and the nuns were just fantastic. So at one point, I thought I was going to be a nun because I admired them. And to this day, I was on the board, the corporate board for Providence Health and Services, because they have done such remarkable work, and they all along. So for me, the profession of the religious, I've admired, and through leadership in a giving way, but they know the business side.
Great. Do any of the rest of you want to comment? Okay, the next question, again, a question that came from someone with us today, is there's been a lot of discussion about the role of men as allies and partners in women's issues. So as we think about the role of women in philanthropy and women as philanthropists, how can we best engage men to help? Any suggestions? Oh, Kathryn, I can tell you've got something.
No, I'm thinking of. I like men, and I've always considered them allies. And I've always considered myself an equal. So for me, that again is one of those tricky. I have not. For me, it's not been an issue.
Okay.
And they're partners in so many ways that I can't imagine doing any of it without them. So
I learned philanthropy as a kid, again, back to Catholic school. Any of you are familiar, at Lent, you got the little envelopes and you put your little dimes in so that you could turn them in filled and they would go into a good cause. So I learned philanthropy without any particular goal in mind of amount and so on. My husband was raised in a Methodist church, and for him, it wasn't just tithing at 10%, it was 10% of gross. And I learned that was a much better way to look at it. So I had a wonderful partner that way, and then we set up a little fund at the Oregon Community Foundation. My desire was to do Hispanic affairs, and his was conservation. So we blended that together. So it was always, he was always sort of in the forefront as far as I was concerned in the philanthropy.
Great.
I like what Orcilia said, but I'm going to take it on another direction and another path. But I think the whole concept of approaching a man versus a woman, I think that's dangerous. I think you got to approach it as though they're all human, because we are. And so I don't think there's that much of a difference. And I think the more we segregate and we differentiate, I think it's going to harm the whole philanthropy concept by itself, because at the end of the day, it's about doing the right thing for the community and giving back to the world. And so I think that's, doesn't matter if they're male or
I would
female.
agree with you. There are philanthropists and there are people who are not philanthropists. And there are, unfortunately, men and women on both of those categories. I didn't realize, because I grew up as a Methodist minister's daughter, that everyone doesn't give. For me, that was a big lesson when I started doing fundraising, because I was brought up to give, and you gave every Sunday, and you did it as more and more during those little holidays. So the piece of it is, I remember sitting on a campaign committee, and we were looking at a list of prospective donors, and a name came up, and they said, this guy would be great. And I said, why would he be great? Well, he loves our organization, and he has 25 planes. And I said, 25 planes. He does not own an airline. No, he doesn't own an airline. He has 25 planes. I said, have we seen him give to the hospital, to his college, to his children's school, or his church? Why, no. He appears on no lists. He is not a philanthropist. He either needs a near-death experience, or he needs, and I would say this about a woman as well, or they need to have a peer explain to them the value of philanthropy in words that they can understand. And one last story, the best story of that was John Hampton, who was speaking at OCF luncheon. And he said he was invited to a dinner with Peter Curler from Bend. He was sitting on his back deck, and Peter said, we have a problem funding the opera. We're going to need your help. And John was on the opera board, and he said, oh, how can I help? He says, well, it's a big problem. And so John wrote a check for $100, and he gave it to Peter, and Peter said, I think you're missing some zeros. And thus began the education of John Hampton, who became one of the biggest donors that our community has seen. So you can convert a non-philanthropist to a philanthropist, but there are only two paths.
Thank you, thank you. So we're running short on time, and I'm going to ask each of our panelists to leave you with some parting advice. But the question I want you to think about with that parting advice, I'm going to roll in some of the questions that have come from our audience today. So, and you can work this in or not, panelists, it's up to you how you want to do it. But one of the questions is, as a leader, when you encounter a challenge that stumps you, what goes through your mind? What's your problem-solving process? And another question is, as you consider gifts that you've made and solicitations that you've been involved in, very possibly from one of the fundraising professionals in the room today, what's been the most satisfying and what made it so? So any advice for our group on overcoming leadership challenges, how you approach that, information on most fulfilling and satisfying solicitations and gift decisions, or any other advice that you'd like to give?
I'll start.
Okay, so Martha, and then we'll just go down the table.
Okay, so the piece of advice I wanted to use is an old Arthur Ashe quote. You have to start where you are. You have to use what you have, and then you have to do what you can. So you can't actually start anyplace else, and you can only use the resources that are within your reach, or within your zone, or within your network, and then you must do what you can. So for me, that was always the, so when I face a challenge, the question is, where am I starting? What do I have as assets? and what is it we want to do.
Thanks.
For me, it's who am I going to call who might know something about this? So it might be a board member, it might be a friend or a colleague, it might be someone I know that I've met in the last 30 years of working and meeting people that I can tap into, because it's beneficial to take your obstacle outside of your desk space, I believe you referred to earlier, and go beyond and begin to bounce ideas around. So I would say that. Satisfying. I'm going to have to think on that, Aggie.
I think if there's an obstacle, excuse me, you look to others, because I don't have all the answers, and there's a lot of sage wisdom out there. So you call in others and say, let's talk about it. And as for the greatest satisfaction in terms of a solicitation, what pops in my mind is something that took place right here at the Mat Club. There was a woman in our community who's no longer with us, unfortunately. She was one of those wonderful women who gave very generously. And I called her and I said, can we get together to talk? She said, oh, Priscilla, you know I'm going to give. We don't have to do this. And I said, no, it's important for me. We don't have to talk about the money. That's the last thing. We don't even have to mention it. I just want to know about you. And we sat downstairs here in the Mat Club and talked for about an hour. I just said, tell me about you. Tell me about your family. Because we were still newcomers here in Portland. If you didn't grow up here and you had to gather the information, and she was an old-time Portlander. And the woman talked to me for 45 minutes and filled my mind with the images of what was going on here before and what she had done. And I said, thank you. That's all I need. She said, oh, what about my gift? I said, I promised we wouldn't talk about money. She said, oh, well, I'll do. And she gave me a figure that was almost twice of what she had done before. But it was because we really didn't talk about the money. We talked about what caused her to give, why she gave, what was important to her.
Great. Thanks. Rupa.
I can't give you too much advice on the fundraising side, but maybe perhaps from a philosophical side, I'd just say, start with the dream. Know that we're here, we're just renting space on earth for a while. Know that you're going to have to give something back, and that's the attitude that you want to deliver to the people that you talk to. And it's about how you approach it and what confidence level that you're going to approach it at. Try not to be a perfectionist, because the truth of the matter is no one's perfect. No one should try to seek perfection, because there's no such thing. And just go for it. And, if you dream it, you'll get it. You just have to have an action plan. So one of the things, if you have confidence, the biggest takeaway is create an action plan of where you want to go, and it will happen.
I think we in philanthropy have a tremendous challenge ahead of us, and that is our demographics. And being on the board of a foundation of a major university and then on the board of regents for another university, I have asked that we start to look seriously at data, that we start to talk seriously about who will be giving to us in the coming years. Because the complexion in the universities is changing, in schools and churches, et cetera, is changing. And yet, as I look out, we have not brought in the diversity that we have in our community into the professions. So that is what I would leave. We need to start very seriously looking at how we begin to change the perceptions about who is giving, but who will be giving in the next few years. I mean, there are some schools here in Oregon that are over 50% minority, some high schools. So just think about that.
Great, thank you. Well, I hope that all of you have found today's program to be thoughtful, provocative at times, and insightful. Would you join me in thanking our panelists?
Thank you very much, Aggie, and all of you on the panel. This has been very insightful, thoughtful, provocative. Got some things to think about, some things to laugh over. Thank you all for you being here and being part of us and making this a terrific event today. And we'll see about doing that again next year. Thank you for being here. Have a great weekend. And hopefully we'll see you next month at our Philanthropy Awards on November 17. Please don't forget that. Thank you.